Somebody counted these, Kamal. There's 400 structural steel connections failing per second. Now, what could cause that?
Well, I mean...
Anything you've ever seen before?
I mean, the idea that one column, actually, or one connection, caused the building to unzip and caused a cascading series of events that brought this building down in such a beautiful manner, an ugly manner, let's say, I mean, for any structural engineer who is willing to spend the time to look at this thing, I think would be, I mean, it's so obvious. But anyway, that's not for us to say.
Well, I also noticed that in this half-speed animation that it stops. Why would they spend 8 years analyzing this and then not show us the rest of the collapse?
Yeah, well, I think this model, that this is what NIST describes as, quote, unquote, an elegant model that describes the collapse of the building, actually is embarrassing. Because, and I think they would, that's why they stopped it. I think it's just too embarrassing.
Okay.
So that's what the crumpled beer can looks like.
So we have massive bulging on the exterior perimeter structure and indentations in the building. It looks like it would probably tip over if it was going to go any further.
Well, yeah, I suppose so.
But this is not what we saw in that beautiful video that goes straight down. We're going to be talking to a controlled demolition expert in just a moment. He might have some other answers. Would you like to make any other points?
No, I mean, this is, my focus has been on Building 7. I read through the NIST report, the structural section, and I think it leaves not too much to be desired. But I think every structural engineer needs to look at it, because this is what we're spending taxpayer money on. And in fact, there is, as a result of this investigation, supposedly engineers need to start designing a certain way or the other. The codes need to be modified, which is a good thing, I guess, but it's based on a fallacy.
What are the chances that this building could have come down by fire?
I think the problem really is that I would accept essentially, at worst, a local failure on this building by fire. I would say maybe one of the connections snaps and one of the beams falls down, or maybe two beams fall down. But I would really be, I mean, it's an impossibility that the building comes down in this fashion by fire. I don't think it's possible.
Well, thank you for sharing your insights with us. Kamal Obaid, structural engineer. Thank you.
Myth. World Trade Center Building 7 had structural damage and was expected to collapse.
And the fire service, one of the things we have to do is our life depends on being able to look at a building and tell if it's going to collapse. We can't always tell. We have to make that judgment call. Buildings like this is World Trade Center 3. If I looked at that, there's no way I'm going into it. That actually, the first picture was when it was hit by the first tower. This is after it's hit by the second tower. No way you're going into it. That looks like it could collapse. The next one's World Trade Center 4. Another, that's obvious damage that I'm not going to be going into that building. World Trade Center 6, no way, not going into it. So all these buildings would have been the ones that were expected to collapse. World Trade Center 7 had fires, pocket fires on multiple floors, had no signs of major destruction that would make us scared to go into that building. So now...
Did they know it was going to come down?
Well, actually, before you play this... Okay. What I want to say is in the fire service, I talk about the incident command system. We're not saying there's people in here that talk about foreknowledge, who talk about it's coming down. We are not saying that these people were involved in any way, because in an incident command system or a fire scene, you get orders from above. There could be just a rumor planted somewhere, and it can trickle down. So there's, just because we're reporting something or firefighters are, doesn't mean they're in on it.
But let's see what they know.
At the last few seconds, he took his hand off, and you heard 3, 2, 1. At the last few seconds, he took his hand off, and you heard 3, 2, 1.
Oh, I see. Go back there. Do fires bring buildings down to countdowns? Fascinating. And let's see what these mysterious construction workers and police officer knew.
Keep your eye on that building. It'll be coming down.
The building is about to blow up. Moving back.
All right, guys.
We are looking back. There's a building about to blow up. On flame. Debris coming down.
Listen for the explosion at the beginning of this video. The mysterious construction worker turning his head around and saying, "Did you hear that? Keep your eye on that building. It's coming down."
Keep your eye on that building. It'll be coming down.
The building is about to blow up. Moving back.
All right, guys.
We are looking back. There's a building about to blow up. On flame. Debris coming down.
Lots of confusion out on the street about this building and what it's about to do. How do they know it's about to blow up? There's a few scattered fires in there. Firemen go up in these buildings all the time, don't they, Eric? With a few
without
scattered
fire? Oh,
fires?
yeah, definitely, yes.
Now, Kevin McPadden and others were moved back 6 blocks behind Building 7. He's a first responder, an Air Force medic. Let's listen to what he says, what he hears from the radio held by the Red Cross worker.
At the last few seconds, he took his hand off, and you heard 3, 2, 1.
Do fires bring buildings down to countdowns? What's going on here?
Myth. The government looked for evidence of explosives.
Now, again, one of the things I looked at when I first looked into this was what do the officials say about it? What are the reports? And so I went to the questions and answers about the World Trade Center 7 collapse from NIST. And just as a sidebar, I spoke about this in San Francisco at Richard's press conference. And these questions were up. They've been up for over 2 years. After our press conference, when we talked about what we're going to talk about here, you can no longer go to this page. So I've saved the screenshots so we can still see them. But this is NIST's final report. Is it possible that thermite or thermate contributed to the collapse of World Trade Center 7? And we'll get in later to what that is. NIST has looked at the application of use of thermite and determined its use to sever columns on 9/11 was unlikely. It is unlikely that 100 pounds of thermite or more could have been carried into World Trade Center 7 and placed around columns without being detected. So they're basically saying because it's hard to do, it's unlikely, because it would be difficult, we shouldn't test for it. They also say, did investigators consider the possibility that an explosion caused or contributed to the collapse of World Trade Center 7? No, and this is their answer. No blast sounds were heard on the audio tracks of video recordings during the collapse of World Trade Center 7 or reported by witnesses. Well, we're going to get into that in a minute. So, Chapter 18. So what NIST didn't consider, they said there was no audible sound, no witnesses, no recordings, and you're going to see contrary to that tonight. But what they didn't do is they didn't read Chapter 18, the basic manual that talks about explosions. In that manual, it says very clearly, Chapter 18, although an explosion is almost always accompanied by the production of a loud noise, the noise itself is not an essential element in the definition of explosion. So you don't need to have a loud noise to consider explosives. You can have it without any noise. So 18.13.2.1, identify explosion or fire. First, determine whether the incident was a fire, explosion, or both, and which came first. The evidence of an explosion is not obvious. The investigator should look for signs of an overpressure condition existing within the structure, including displacement or bulging of walls, floors, ceilings, doors and windows, roofs, other structural members, blah, blah, blah. So we saw all that happen. Those buildings came apart. We obviously had all those things happen. So next, you have to identify the force vectors. So the greater the force, the farther similar pieces of debris will be thrown from the epicenter. So in Trade Centers 1 and 2, you'll see later, they were thrown great distances. We were seeing all the signs. Explosion pressures, 10 psi overpressure, you'll have probable total destruction of the building. At 30, steel towers will be blown down. Well, we obviously saw that in all 3 buildings. So only that kind of overpressure would cause that. So yeah, we shouldn't even say only. The fact that we have that happen, we should suspect explosives also. So high-order damage. Higher damage is characterized by shattering of the structure. This is still in the NIST manual, or not NIST, the NFPA manual. Higher damage is characterized by shattering of the structure, producing small pulverized debris. We had that. So this is, obviously, we see shattering the structure, small pulverized debris. 19.4.8.2.6, extremism. and gets into extremism. Terrorists may include fire as but one of a variety of weapons, along with explosives, used in furthering his or her goal. Well, we know they used them in 1993 on the World Trade Center. We know Oklahoma City was brought down by explosives. So if we have all this history of it, we have the manual saying you should test over and over. What are the excuses? Why did they refuse to this day to test for it?
I mean, the idea that one column, actually, or one connection, caused the building to unzip and caused a cascading series of events that brought this building down in such a beautiful manner, an ugly manner, let's say, is I mean, for any structure, is too embarrassing.
Okay.
So that's what the crumpled beer can looks like.
So we have massive bulging on the exterior perimeter structure and indentations in the building. It looks like it would probably tip over if it was going to go any further. Somebody counted these, Kamal. There's 400 structural steel connections failing per second. Now, what could cause that?
Well, I mean...
Anything you've ever seen before?
An engineer who is willing to spend the time to look at this thing, I think, would be, I mean, it's so obvious. But anyway, that's not for us to say.
Well, I also noticed that in this half-speed animation that it stops. Why would they spend 8 years analyzing this and then not show us the rest of the collapse?
Yeah, well, I think this model, that this is what NIST describes as, quote, unquote, an elegant model that describes the collapse of the building, actually is embarrassing. Because, and I think they would, that's why they stopped it.